I will start sharing now and jump into some use cases. So as I mentioned, I'm an engineering manager, and part of what I do on a regular cadence is look at the stories in the current iteration. We made a little demo iteration here where we have a few stories in play, we have some stories in the future iteration, and so on. And one of the built-in spaces that Sam was mentioning is the current iteration space, which is what is visible here. So this, these filters show how we get to that view. We have an iteration state filter, and the selected filter is just started. So this will show all started iterations that are owned by the current team, by this .spots team. And so this is a nice top level view you can use to view what work is happening in the iteration. As we see, there's a story ready for dev, one in development, and one that's already complete. Good job, Sam. So one of the things that I do on an iteration cadence is to have a spend some time looking ahead at the next iteration. What I want to do here is to be able to see all the stories that are queued up and to be able to plan, estimate them, take a look at them, make sure all the description is appropriate, we have the acceptance criteria, and so on and so forth. So to do that, I can start from the current iteration space and then modify it. So here I'm going to pick the unstarted state for an iteration, and immediately I see all the stories that have been added to a future iteration. And I already see there are some stories that are planned. These two stories have an estimate. There's a few stories in unplanned. I might want to move some of those into a planned state. So let me go ahead and do that right now. So I'm going to pick a few stories just to highlight the bulk editing feature. I'm going to select 3 stories and then drag all of them at once into the plan column. Great. Now, the next thing I might want to do is find those stories that are not estimated and maybe add some points to them. And usually we will do this in a group with the team so that each person can understand what the story is about and give us an estimate of how much work is in the story. So the way I would do that is I have to kind of manually determine which stories need an estimate, or there's a filter especially for doing that called the estimate filter. With that, I can filter by all the stories that are currently unestimated, and that gives me a quick way to see all the stories that need estimating. I'm going to pick one story, add an estimate, and the nice thing is I have these left and right buttons here that allow me to just go through all the stories in the column without having to go back out and come back in. And it's just a small thing that makes my life a little bit easier. So I'm going to go ahead and estimate all these stories that are currently planned. And as you see, those stories have been removed from this column, even though they were there before, because they're now estimated. And so this filter will exclude them. So this is a pretty useful space, but it's currently a modified version of the current iteration. And I actually want to keep this space for future use. So what I'm going to do is save as, which will create a new space with this set of these set of filters. And I'm going to name it dots refinement. And keep it as shared with the entire workspace. I'm going to save that. And now I have a new space that is shared, indicated by this icon. And now I can just take this URL and share that URL with my team so that during the refinement, we can all be looking at the same page. Just wanted to call out one thing. I like to keep my empty columns collapsed so that if there's nothing in there, I can see the most amount of work on my stories page. Right, so going back to the current iteration, you see that after I created this new space from this original space, all of the changes I made have been reverted. So now this space is restored to its original state. Another thing that I like to do is to, in the current iteration, imagine there are a lot more stories. It might be a little hard to see which stories are making progress and which stories are not. And so one thing I like to do is to often take a look at which stories have an owner and which stories don't have any owner. And maybe there might be some issues with those stories that don't have an owner that need a little bit more feedback, that need some clarification. So this filter allows me to do just that. Now I can quickly zoom into those stories that don't have an owner and hopefully resolve any blocking issues, or maybe I can just talk with one of my teammates to assign it to them. And for this one, I think Oasis is a perfect candidate to work on this story. Get to work, Oasis. And now this part is done. I don't necessarily want to keep this on there, so I'll just take this filter off so I can keep this space as a way to look through the iteration. Now, that's it for my refinement process and keeping an eye on the iteration. Another thing that I like to do is to understand exactly what kind of stories are in my team's purview, and I like to make sure that those stories are in the right epics, because oftentimes people create stories, they put them in the wrong epic, they might forget to add an epic, and it makes those stories hard to find and keep track of. So one really cool feature of this new stories page is it allows me to, let's say I really care that all my stories are in this bot MVP epic, and any other stories that are not in that epic are liable to get lost and forgotten. So what I do here is I open up the epic filter and I find my bot MVP epic. And instead of finding the stories that are in that epic, I say not in this epic. And now I'm able to see all the stories that might have forgotten to add the epic piece of metadata, or might be in the wrong epic, like this story in a different epic. So I'm going to leave the icebox, the backlog story alone, because we're not ready to work on that. But these stories are clearly need to be in the appropriate epic. So I'm going to use the bulk editing feature again, select them, and add them all to the right epic. And now all my stories are in the right epic, they'll disappear, and I'm happy again, because now I see that all my work that is happening is in the right epic. So that's a little snapshot of how we can use the advanced filtering features on the new stories page to really facilitate your iteration planning, your forward-looking, understanding your forward-looking, your stories that are coming up in the future, and also clean up your workspace a little bit and kind of groom your backlog and make sure things are in the right place.